The ocean keeps its secrets with a patience that outlives empires. At 2 miles beneath the Atlantic surface, where light has long surrendered and pressure molds time into something slow and deliberate, lies the wreck of the RMS Titanic. To approach it is to approach a threshold between eras, not merely between surface and abyss, but between living memory and museum catalogued in rust and silt. Diver teams, scientists, engineers, historians, and a few compelled by private devotion, descend into that dark to read the ship as though it were a palimpsest, each expedition revealing new layers while revealing the inexorable passage of decay. The story of those descents is not only technological, it is in equal measure an ethical chronicle. How do you step into a place where hundreds of lives ended without turning it into a spectacle? How do you balance the hunger for revelation against the obligation to remember? These questions accompany every remotely operated vehicle and every suit-clad descent. In the logbooks and recordings, in the low, careful radio voices that link pilot to surface, the wreck is treated less like wreckage and more like a sight that demands humility. Teams speak of procedures and protocols, but beneath the procedures, there is a constant moral whispering. To whom does this site belong, and what is our duty to what remains? Historically, Titanic's journey from proud liner to encrusted ruin has been narrated in chunks. The launch and its glamour, the collision with an iceberg on a cold April night, the frantic hours that followed, and the aftermath, both the immediate inquiries and the century of myth-making. The dives reclaim a different narrative thread, the slow choreography of decay, the unexpected pockets of preservation, the small human artifacts that persist where metal collapses. A child's shoe wedged in a stairwell becomes evidence of a life rather than a mere object. A brass knob, still green with age, suggests hands that once turned it. These tiny details insist on a form of attention that is almost genealogical, tracing lines from object to owner, from owner to story, from story to the larger human tapestry. There is an aesthetic to deep-sea operations that is almost surgical. Pilots coax their vehicles with the steadiness of a watchmaker handling tiny springs. The flood of a sub's lights through the black is harsh yet intimate, transforming an indifferent steel scar into a scene of private remembrance. At that depth, currents are subtle but unyielding. A misjudged turn can stir decades of sediment and erase what evidence remains. That is why teams work in narrow windows of weather and in meticulous coordination. Every maneuver is recorded, every vibration is logged, every visual cue is annotated for later interpretation. The human element is where these dives turn from technical report to narrative. Divers and pilots speak about the wreck with a vocabulary that mixes engineering precision with something like prayer. There are routine checks, ballast adjustments, tether management, feed calibrations, and there are moments when speech curtails to a reverential silence, as if the machinery itself recognizes a boundary. One pilot likened the feeling of hovering over B-deck to entering an old familiar home at night. The layout evokes memory, and the light reveals stories that spin out of view as quickly as they appear. The radio voice compresses awe into technical descriptors because poetry over radio carries poor utility. Still, the restraint betrays a human attempt to maintain composure near a site of collective grief. Artifacts recovered, or even photographed in situ, spark debates that ripple far beyond the scientific community. A tarnished pocket watch, stopped at a precise moment, seems perversely to freeze one instant of a collapse that took hours. But conservationists caution against literal readings. Timepieces can stop for many reasons under the sea. The truth is subtler. Objects are clues, not certainties. Each item must be logged, conserved, and interpreted within a web of archival research. That the wreck still yields objects is both a gift and a burden. It invites storytelling, but insists upon careful curation. Sonar and photogrammetry have become the lingua franca of modern exploration. Layered 3D models allow researchers to return to the wreck virtually, to take measurements and annotate conditions without ever sinking another tethered light. These virtual returns democratize the wreck. Museums, classrooms, and even the public can view high-resolution renderings that maintain a safe distance while preserving access. Yet virtual access does not absolve the questions about physical interaction. Once collectors and thrill-seekers raided the wreck for souvenirs, now the conversation is about stewardship. Technology can amplify both humility and hubris, and it is the human governance of technology that determines which wins. There are two quieter mysteries that instruments are only beginning to pass. Microbial mats, colonies of bacteria that feast on the steel, eat the ship at a chemical level, producing fluffy growths that obscure rivets and collapse seams from within. The science of these microbes suggests that the wreck is not merely rusting, but being biologically consumed in a process that neither honors nor forgets the human story. Understanding this process is urgent because it can inform conservation strategies, where intervention might save an artifact from imminent dissolution, and where it would only delay what is, in geological terms, inevitable. The presence of these organisms complicates any simple narrative of preservation versus neglect. The divers who go to Titanic are an eclectic community. Some arrive bearing the badge of academic institutions, carrying hypotheses about metallurgical failure or architectural vulnerability. Others come from film production houses, intent on creating an image that will frame public imagination for years. Still others are solitary explorers, motivated by family histories or by a personal attraction to liminal spaces. Tensions sometimes flare. Are dives for science, education, memory, or entertainment? The best teams, those that endure and produce meaningful work, are those that cultivate interdisciplinary respect. Engineers who defer to archivists, filmmakers who yield to conservationists, and historians who learn to speak the language of instrumentation. The ethical dimension intensifies when human remains enter the conversation. The Titanic was a site of profound loss, and while the passage of time reduces the likelihood of intact remains, the possibility exists and must govern behavior. The prevailing ethic among responsible practitioners is clear: treat the wreck as a gravesite. That ethic shapes choices about photography angles, public displays, and the language used in press releases. No photograph should titillate morbid curiosity. No recovered item should be paraded as a collectible. Responsibility has become a hallmark in contemporary protocols, and it is enforced as much by peer pressure within the diving community as by law. Beyond ethics and ecology, the dives carry a narrative function for contemporary culture. The Titanic is more than a sunken vessel. It is a canvas onto which modern anxieties and myths are projected. For some, it is a tale of hubris, an emblem of technological certainty undone by natural contingency. For others, it is a social allegory, spotlighting class divisions evident in survival statistics and deck assignments. Divers who gaze at the remains sometimes report experiencing a kind of temporal compression. The ship's contours are familiar from films and textbooks, but in the flesh, if metal can be called flesh, the scale and fragility are immediate. The public reception of new discoveries is another chapter in this ongoing story. When photographs show a previously unseen room, or when sonar maps reveal an intact staircase, headlines erupt and documentaries proliferate. Such moments are double-edged. They renew interest and funding, but can also cheapen the subject if treated as mere clickbait. Wise stewardship requires that findings be presented with context, accompanying narratives that emphasize process as well as product. In museums, digital installations can provide layers of interpretation that hold the public's fascination without turning the past into spectacle. Perhaps the most poignant moments occur when divers encounter traces that suggest private lives. An item of jewelry in a pocket-like shadow, a trinket half buried beneath a fold of tissue-like sediment. These traces humanize a ship that the world sometimes reduces to a statistic. In the soft circle of a sub's light, a small object can reclaim a life from the margins of history, transforming an abstraction into a person who once laughed, argued, worried, loved. The impulse to tell that person's story responds to a fundamental human need to render loss legible and to make memory a form of stewardship. As the wreck continues its slow transformation, debates about its future persist. Some scholars argue for in situ preservation, leaving the site untouched and focusing on virtual documentation. Others suggest selective recovery of artifacts at risk of loss. There are also proposals for an international governance framework that would treat Titanic like an undersea cultural heritage site, protected by treaty and monitored by scientific bodies. These discussions are not merely bureaucratic, they are moral queries about who decides and who remembers.